as part of the material. So thanks, Veronica, for doing that. Next slide, please, Fed. Okay, so we're here as part of a nature-based solutions learning program, and so we'll just start off with a really quick definition of nature-based solutions according to our program to set the scene. So nature-based solutions are actions that protect, restore or manage the functionality of ecosystems in the context of a changing climate, while delivering co-benefits for people and nature, as well as measurable climate change adaptation and mitigation outcomes. Probably many in the room know this definition already, but that's just in case there are some new faces here. So I work for a program called Climate Resilient by Nature. As I mentioned, we have active projects in 9 countries. Most of these projects are in the Pacific, but there's also projects in Timor-Leste and Southeast Asia. In addition to these implementation projects, we've developed a learning program to support research and knowledge exchange regarding different thematic areas within nature-based solutions. So one of the areas identified was blue food systems, and we really wanted to look at the contribution of blue food systems to nature-based solutions in the Pacific, and that's what we're here for today. So why did we choose to focus a research and learning program on blue foods as nature-based solutions? So the reason is, one of the really important lessons that has emerged from our program, it's been running for 2.5 years now, is that the effectiveness of nature-based solutions projects, the effective NBS projects have each established an interconnected system of incentives that link ecosystem protection with livelihood improvements. In many cases, these livelihood improvements come from blue foods, either from wild harvest species or from aquaculture. In these NBS, the ecosystems that support healthy populations of blue food species also provide critical ecosystem services. For example, as many of you know, a healthy mangrove ecosystem is needed if you want to have a healthy population of sea grapes. And the mangrove obviously protects shorelines from erosion, it protects many species of juvenile fish, among other benefits. So the objective for this research was to identify the extent to which blue foods practices can support conservation, food security and livelihoods, and climate resilience outcomes, which together you can see really is a nature-based solution. Of course, it is possible to cultivate or harvest a blue food and simultaneously damage surrounding ecosystems, or to interact with the blue food system in a way that's unsustainable and depletes the resource itself, or interact with it in a way that means value chains for that resource aren't well established or maintained. And so therefore it's not really a sustainable approach. So through this research, we wanted to learn about the conditions and kind of the ingredients that are needed to do a blue foods NBS well, and we wanted to make a contribution to blue foods and NBS projects in the region. I guess another angle or way that we also have been looking at this piece of work is around contributions to design of sustainable NBS more broadly. So in many cases, when people talk about sustainable financing for a nature-based solution, they talk about carbon market projects. Carbon market projects can provide reliable long-term financing for ecosystem protection to communities. And while we know there are problematic examples of carbon projects, there are also some excellent examples that we have looked at quite deeply in another learning program. However, we also know carbon markets aren't accessible, or they're not the right choice for many communities. And we think that in many contexts, blue foods can be that key to long-term income and food security and provide that core incentive that would sustain a community-led NBS. So that's what this research is really about. And today is really about unpacking that topic. So yeah, thank you very much for joining today. I think we're going to hear some excellent research findings around blue food systems, and then we're going to unpack that with a great panel. So I'd just like to now introduce you to our research team and panel. And like to thank everyone that are up on the screen here for sharing both their time and expertise through this session today, but also their contributions throughout the research process. And you'll see we've got a great mix of researchers and practitioners who will help us really unpack some of the findings today and address some of the kind of so what questions. Here are the findings from this research. What are the implications? What does it mean? So the research team from Institute of Sustainable Futures at University Technology Sydney is Dr. Federico De Villa and Laura-Lise Russo. So they'll present the findings today. And then for our panel, just to mention also Anna Gero from ISF was also a contributor to this research. On our panel today, we've got Una Malani. She's the Great Sea Reef Program Manager at WWF, so deeply involved in blue food systems from a kind of conservation angle. We have Dr. Shalini Singh from Fiji National University, who, among many other things, was deeply involved in the seagrass case study and research, and Terry Kerr from an aquaculture specialist at SPC, who's really supported the research on the mangrove oysters case study. Okay, our agenda for today. We've got a 1.5-hour session, but I think it's going to fly because it's going to be such an interesting session. I'd like to request people, as you have questions that come up, especially during the research findings presentation, please type them into the chat. We'll monitor those questions and we're going to put some directly to the research team after their presentation. Some we'll answer in the chat directly in the interest of time. So after I'll hand over it shortly to Fed, who will present on the research framework. He'll speak to linking blue food systems and NBS outcomes and present some findings from the first case study in Fiji, which is focused on mangrove oysters. Then we'll hand over to Laura-Lise, who will speak about seagrass conservation as a driver of blue food systems. Then we'll have a brief session where we'll address some questions for the research team. After that, we'll have an introduction. Each of the panelists will introduce themselves and speak about the importance of blue food systems to them and the organisation that they represent. Then we'll have a panel discussion and an open Q&A with the audience. Okay, thanks, Fed. So just to quickly note that this webinar recording and all publications from this research project will be sent to everyone who registered today, but will also be posted on our website, which is up on the screen here. And if you've got any questions, please send them through to me, and my email's there. So before we kick off, we're going to do a quick Mentimeter to learn a little bit more about who's in the virtual room, your perspectives on blue food systems thinking and its relevance to you. So you can see on the screen there's a QR code, a link, and also if you just join directly from the Menti website, that's the code to join. And maybe we can post the code in the chat as well. Thank you. I see Fed's done that. And I will shortly steal the screen so that I can present the... Oh, yep, we've already got some answers coming. Lots of Australia. Let me... Getting there. Cool. All right, we've got quite a few people joining from Australia and then some of the Indigenous place names as well. And quite a few, same number, I think, from Fiji, which is fabulous. I hope we get a lot of good Fiji questions today. All right, let's go to the next question. Has that appeared for people on their Menti? Yes, hopefully. Do you think blue food systems are relevant to nature-based solutions? Okay, we're getting a lot of yes. That's good news. Hopefully our rationale for this project is compelling?
Hmm.
Awesome. All right. Pretty resounding yes. We've got an audience that's in line with us. Excellent. Okay, I might go to the next question then. That's pretty clear. Why do you think blue food systems are relevant or not relevant to nature-based solutions? Pacific Islands are blue economies. Yep, I think that pretty much sums it up. Livelihoods. Lots of focus on livelihoods. So many people dependent on blue foods. All are interconnected. I think that's so true. They're nature-based by design. Require the whole ecosystem for sustainable functioning. Need to be more aware and integrated across terrestrial and blue foods. That's true. Sustainability requires food, water, and other human needs to be part of a healthy, functioning ecosystem that incorporates traditional knowledge and land uses. We need all hands on deck. Carbon sequestration is key. Adding seaweed to diets of cattle reduces methane. Okay, I think we've got some excellent, really thoughtful responses here, and we're going to have a very engaged audience today. Hope we get lots of questions. This is awesome. All right, I think we've got one last question, and this one is a bit of a tricky one. We're asking you to identify which of these following areas do you work on most. So it's a ranking question. And I know that can be challenging because you might say we work on all three, but yeah, we're asking you to let us know which ones you do work on most. And this is the final question. So I'll give you all about 30 more seconds to answer this one. Okay, climate adaptation and mitigation. Ecosystem conservation, then food security. That's interesting. But they're all pretty prominent, so that also makes sense. Okay, awesome. A few more seconds. Thank you so much, everyone. I think that's it. So I'll hand back to Fed now, and hand over to the ISF team to kick us off with their presentation on findings. Thanks so much, Fed.
Thanks so much, Georgia, and thank you everyone for attending. Really great audience and insightful comments already from the mentees. So I will be presenting an overview of how we did the research and particularly the framework and the perspective we took to understanding those connections between blue foods and the multiple types of MBS outcomes that can be achieved from a blue food. I say I'll also present some findings from the mangrove case study that we conducted. And then my colleague Laura Lees will present in a bit more detail the seagrasses case study that we undertook for this project. So as part of any sustainability and particularly systems-oriented research project, it's really important to work collaboratively with different types of experts and stakeholders working in the food system space. And would like to start by acknowledging the great team that contributed one way or another to this research project. Importantly, I'd like to thank SPC, FAME Division, and FNU, who are here on the call, for supporting some of our thinking, directing some of the types of material we should be drawing from, and contextualizing our methods within the everyday realities of blue food systems in Fiji. The FNU students and staff would also like to thank. They came on the field trips with us and provided a lot of research support and insights into the topics that we were investigating. The Ministries of Fisheries in Fiji were really helpful and importantly attended the field activities to be part of the research and contribute also some of those policy and technical dimensions of fisheries. So very thankful for the Ministry of Fisheries staff. Our colleague Anna, who I believe is on the call, thank you for all the contributions you've made throughout the research. Anna's now doing a PhD at Griffith University. And Salome Oviagnol, who also helped us with some of the research background. And they might not be on the call, but the community members are instrumental in social qualitative participatory research, and it's their insights that actually help us tell the stories of these blue food system benefits as MBS. So let's start with a little bit of research context and why blue in food systems. So globally, food systems discussions have really focused on land, market, and economics. And fish and aquaculture have historically been forgotten, in quotation marks, in these food systems discussions. And what we mean in systems discussions is looking beyond the productivity dimensions of land and sea. It's looking at those value chain and nutritional and policy dimensions that impact how we manage the land and the sea. And in today's world, that's also associated with the governance and the climate dimensions of food production. So recent papers have indicated that aquaculture and fisheries are increasingly being recognized in blue food systems, and that's building from the wealth of scientific and social research into fisheries and aquaculture. In 2021, the Blue Foods Assessment conducted a global scientific analysis of the different contributions blue food systems make at a global level for improving different types of food system outcomes. This was led by Stanford University and a series of other collaborators from throughout the world, and really painted a global picture of what blue foods are doing and the state of them in the world. Now, as we know, we don't need to tell this audience that fisheries and aquaculture are major contributors to livelihood, well-being, and natural resource management, particularly in the Blue Pacific continent, which is, as someone said, it's a blue economy continent, and it's really driven by water-based economic activities. But also importantly, there are a mix of emissions profiles and vulnerability profiles associated with these different types of blue food commodities. Different types of risk in terms of, for example, ocean acidification and what that means for particular fish species, loss and the implications for food security, but also the emissions attributed to fishing effort and fuel demands and the types of processing that's carried out in blue foods. And why does this all matter? Well, as we know, there's essentially four big categories that we've found from the different types of literatures around the blue foods that are important for focusing on blue foods. One is at the top, which is food and nutrition. As we know, marine species that are major sources of micronutrients, vitamin B12, omega-3, and fatty acids, and they can make a substantial contribution to reducing the burden of malnutrition. At the bottom, we also have the substantial contributions to livelihoods. Globally, 600 million people at a minimum rely on blue foods for their livelihoods. That number is probably double or triple when you associate the industries and markets associated with blue foods. On the left, we have the environmental footprint associated with blue foods. So it's no secret that global fishery stocks are declining, that the aquaculture industry is growing as a means of supporting economic growth, as well as providing alternative income and livelihoods for the depleted fish stocks. But there's also potential for novel fishing practices and aquaculture practices to reduce the environmental footprints of blue foods. And on the right, we have this concept from climate change adaptation of adaptive capacity. And this starts to integrate to MBS. So these are the buffers and the capacities that blue food ecosystems or social practices contribute to in terms of managing climate change and the increasing risks that climate poses on food systems. And in the Pacific region, we have this growing interest in blue foods. So this paper came out a few years ago, read by Colette Wobnitz and a few collaborators from SPC. And it's essentially a call for action in terms of doing research and understanding the regional state of blue food systems from these different lenses of climate, economics, and nutrition. And my understanding is that this work is still ongoing, and we're hoping to see the results from this piece of work over the next few years. Now, why focus on MBS and food systems links? Well, biodiversity is generally attributed to having a healthy and thriving food system, and that can support dietary diversity. Trade-off identification and management in blue foods is really important because that can determine how much it delivers to different MBS outcomes. And if we consider MBS within a narrow conservation agenda, we might risk perpetuating some of the existing inequalities, notably in terms of access to economic activities, such as the ones provided by blue foods. And another important lens that we'll bring into this is that whilst blue food systems is often a very macro, either regional or global lens to take to look at the change in blue foods, that creates the risk of overlooking the everyday experiences of communities and the people that manage and interact with the sea every day. So it's important to apply this MBS and food systems lens to community perspectives to determine the place-based insights on how they're managing blue foods. So how did this become part of the research? Well, we focused on existing activities that are providing direct livelihood to communities. So most ocean-based activities will do that. And we tried to look at a combination of general coastal fishing and also open ocean aquaculture activities, just to look at a bit of diversity in blue food system activities. And we really tried to focus on community perspectives. So we undertook two community case studies to look at those different types of outcomes from blue foods, whilst also integrating some of the country level and regional level insights of what are the trends and issues in blue food systems as NBS contributors. Now, the Institute for Sustainable Futures, one of the lenses we like to take to work is systems thinking. It is core to food systems research and practice because it's about integrating different elements and different types of perspectives and methods in understanding food systems change. And broadly speaking, systems thinking refers to the practice of thinking about relationships between different parts of a particular situation. A general focus of system thinking is the feedbacks, the outcomes, and the emergent behaviors that occur as the system changes through time. There is a giant body of knowledge and experience in systems thinking, including traditional knowledges, which most of them are by default systemic in how they conceptualize human nature relations. In terms of Western thinking and systems thinking, Donella Meadows does provide a good set of overview of simple approaches to systems thinking. And I encourage anyone interested in it to find this book. I believe it's free online in some areas or quite cheap. And it does provide a good overview of systems methodologies. Now, getting to a bit of detail of systems thinking, but this is important for the topic of blue foods. Generally, there are two types of systems. One is complicated systems. This relates to managing the hardware of issues. For example, the irrigation on a farm, or managing a hatchery, which is infrastructure, or the line fishing equipment used for fishing. Complicated systems can be difficult to manage, but often have boundaries, such as limited amount of land or equipment. They often have measures, and they also have limits. So the things that we can often understand and put boundaries around. And I would argue that most solutions in the food systems have focused on this. They're focused on optimizing efficiency, maximizing equipment, improving technical skills for growing and producing food. The other types of systems are complex systems. Complex systems relate to the trade-offs and understanding the balance between the cultural, the technical, and the multiple types of environmental development and other outcomes associated with a system. Complex systems are complex because they integrate non-tangible things. such as beliefs and values. This also includes religion and relationships. It includes the science as well, so technical environmental conditions of a system, which we can measure and monitor. And it also includes issues of power, equity, and economic development. So complex systems are, by definition, much more complex to understand. And we argue it's important to take this systems lens to food systems because often, if we don't, we might create risk of missing some important parts of the system. And I would argue, as in the green, there's an increasing move towards this type of thinking, but the complexity of it is quite challenging for everyone, including researchers. So how do we handle this complexity methodologically? The value of this type of thinking for MBSs in the Pacific region, we've synthesized as four. There might be many others. But as I briefly mentioned earlier, many Pacific indigenous and traditional knowledges are systemic in nature. This is the way people historically have connected with people, land, and sea, along with religious and cultural beliefs. However, this type of thinking we know is challenged by the economic and climate realities that are being imposed on communities. So systems thinking allows us to grapple with that. Systems thinking also links the technical and the cultural. A good example of this is the SPC New Song for Coastal Fisheries, which really tries to combine science and cultural practices associated with coastal fishing. Systems thinking also supports trade-off recognition and management between sectors, and it helps us understand the interactions between scales. How does one thing that happened in a remote community of Fiji link with the district level changes in blue foods and also the policy priorities and donor priorities associated with blue foods? So it helps us make those connections as we investigate blue food systems. So with all that framing, which is one of the contributions in itself that we're making from this research, is our framework and what we did and how we questioned the case studies and organized some of our participatory activities and interviews. So essentially, we created this Blue Food Systems outcome framework, which are three columns at the top. And we wanted to understand how does an activity contribute to climate outcomes in purple, food security and livelihood outcomes in green, and conservation outcomes in blue. And we acknowledge that it's probably impossible to achieve the three equally. So part of the process is how do we handle those trade-offs and how do we make decisions of what we prioritize over another in an outcome? We sought to understand different types of perspectives of how these outcomes are being achieved across regional, national, subnational, and community levels through a mix of different stages of interviews with different stakeholders. But the core insights and reflections and methodological applications of systems thinking came from the community level case studies. And the report that we are in the process of finalizing and will hopefully have out in the next few months will really be answering these three research questions. So to what extent do blue food practices support conservation, livelihoods and food security and climate resilience outcomes as per the framework? Question two is a bit more high level, and it's about what are the potentially different framings of blue food systems benefits from different stakeholders. And question three is a systems question. What are the systems feedbacks and processes within the case studies, and what do they tell us about future food systems in the Pacific? Now, we'll present some results associated with some of these questions. Obviously, we've tried to package it in a way that speaks to the time limit that we have in this webinar. I'm going to move now to a bit of practice, which is how we did the research, which is participatory and social science oriented in nature, with the various collaborators I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. I'll give a brief overview of mangrove and the seagrass method, but Laura Elise will present in a lot more detail the seagrass restoration case study when she speaks. So we focus on mangrove oyster cultivation in Monaira, which has had a lot of exposure and interaction with donors, with ministries, with NGOs, partly because of its geographic proximity to town center. So it's only accessible by boat, but it's only a 20 to 30-minute boat ride to land and then a relatively close connection to town. It's also got a relatively entrepreneurial community leadership group that has been able to profit and maximize the benefits of different types of nature-based activities, one of which has been mangrove oysters as an open ocean aquaculture activity. We interviewed 17 people, 7 women and 10 men in the community. This was all done with the support of FNU and Ministry of Fisheries staff, as well as ethics approvals from the university at UTS. We also conducted FGDs with 11 people, 2 women's groups and 2 men's groups. And again, the different research collaborators were part of these conversations to help distill some of the outcomes and contributions Blue Foods are making for the community. The same methods, different types of numbers of participants were implemented in the seagrass case study. So just into a bit of detail of these were mostly one-day activities with the community. Essentially, we spent some time what we're calling establishing baselines and also understanding the context of food security, conservation, and climate outcomes. For the mangrove oyster case study particularly, there is a lot of literature already on the substantial work that SPC and Ministry of Fisheries have done with this community. So there's some documented evidence already. A lot of it was around the COVID period. So we came in a few years later to essentially look a bit at how things have changed. And complementing those interviews, we did workshop activities. So one was focused on a rich pictures exercise, which comes from the soft systems methodology background, which is essentially a tool for visualizing the state of a system for a community. We also did an activity focused on the aspirations and visions for where the industry or the blue food system can go for the community. And then we did a prioritizing voting exercise where the people that attended got a chance to essentially vote and rank their preferred sort of priority areas, so where they think the industry and their blue food could go. Now, analyzing data, I won't go too much into the details, but we, on the right-hand side, did some qualitative analysis on a program called In Vivo, which helps us analyze interviews in many ways, but we chose thematic analysis. But as trying to bring a systems lens to the activities and question 3, which is around feedbacks, we used this exercise of causal loop diagrams. And what we did here in a very simple form was to draw from all the literature and insights from community and regional expertise to draw a systems map of what is affecting a core element of that system. So when Laurelis presents, you'll see she'll go through the example of the seagrass case study, focus on a focus variable of interest, which is the blue. And that is essentially what we think that based on the data, if that changes, might generate different types of outcomes for the community. The way a causal loop diagram works, and the way we applied it is based on that blue variable, we looked at what is driving directly and indirectly changes in that part of the system. And then we asked, if that variable changes, what are some of the potential impacts, positive or negative, that might have to different parts of the system. And then the red are the feedback loops. So these are connections between if something changes in the future as an impact, does that actually then change the original driver and make the situation better or worse? And we also validated these diagrams. So these diagrams were generated by the UTS team after the field trips and shared with FNU and SPC for some further nuancing and reflections. So I'll just quickly show you some emerging insights from the mangrove oyster case study. So I mentioned this community is boat access only, has been historically well connected. The community has been very proactive in identifying their needs over the last decade, and that has led to support from Ministry of Fisheries and SPC to enhance the mangrove oyster production and ability for the community to then try and sell it to existing markets in Fiji. And there's also been, like I mentioned, some literature, particularly on the benefits to women and women's group and the flow-on effects of that for the wider community from the mangrove oyster industry. When we ran the workshops around how do these three system outcomes eventuate and how do you perceive them in your system? In terms of conservation, the community spoke about the changes in proactive conservation of mangroves due to its role in oyster cultivation. They acknowledge how important that synergy is between mangroves and the oyster habitat. And to the point that they were talking about reductions in cutting some of the mangroves for firewood and establishing mangrove nurseries so they can start replanting. So there was insights around how they maybe explicitly or implicitly practicing conservation due to the mangrove oyster benefits. They also spoke about perceived changes in total marine species around the mangrove oyster farms and spoke about how important it is to try and protect those areas and finding ways of monitoring essentially illegal activities that may eventuate due to the increases in fish species near the mangrove habitat and near the oyster habitats. Now, in terms of food security and livelihoods, the incomes generated from oysters was invested in different ways. There were sub-industries and sub-livelihood activities developed, such as, for example, the women were printing clothes or printing on materials so they could then sell. It really triggered essentially greater income for selected members of the community, and we spoke about the issues associated with the access to the site and the distribution of benefits. So there was a lot there in terms of livelihood benefits. We did hear some limitations around what is happening for growing the industry. One was market constraints in terms of changing consumer demand and who is buying and a reduction in people buying the oysters, as well as sewage contamination to the area. And they really prioritized the need for marketing and business development skills to keep maximizing benefits from this industry. Whether price regulation, which is a really challenging policy space, but whether that is a way of maintaining competition for the community. And also the critical food safety and quality assurance components associated with oysters, given they could have high consumer food safety risks if not managed properly. And climate outcomes were not mentioned very much, but there was the well-known protection that mangroves offer to storm surges and potential carbon sink associated with mangroves that was mentioned, but it wasn't really prioritized as a high-level driver for working in oysters. And as my closing slide before we tell you about the seagrasses, this was the ranking that the community did. And what you can see at the bottom is that climate outcomes and priorities wasn't the highest. It wasn't voted very highly, but they did vote for marine protected areas as a conservation practice because it can protect the mangrove ecosystem and hopefully expand it. And we would argue that by doing that, you would inevitably achieve some climate outcomes as well. And in the middle, in the green, you saw this inevitable food security priorities as well, particularly the increased incomes from oysters that the community would like to continue pursuing. So I'm going to pause there, Laurelise, and I'll let you now take over the presentation with your slides. And if you can unmute yourself, you can tell us about the seagrass case study. Thank you.
Apologies, 1 second. I'm just trying to make my screen work. Can you see my slides?
Yep, you just need to go. Oh, we were.
Apologies. I'm not sure what's happening.
If you want me to share, I'm happy to.
I'll just try a second time. All right.
Looks good.
Perfect. Thank you. Apologies for that. Yeah, so I'm now going to present the second case study, which focuses on seagrass restoration as an enabler of blue food economies. So seagrasses are marine flowering plants primarily found in intertidal and subtidal zones. And globally, they cover 0.1% of the ocean floor. In the Pacific region, they are thought to cover over 1,400 square meters and nearly 60 square meters in Fiji. And despite a relatively limited coverage, seagrasses provide essential environmental outcomes, notably around capturing carbon, reducing shoreline erosion, and providing habitat, nursery, and feeding grounds for aquatic species. So various threatening processes affect seagrass meadows in the Pacific and elsewhere, such as water pollution, destruction, and overexploitation caused by land-based extractive activities, agricultural activities, infrastructure development and tourism, as well as fishing or aquaculture activities. Additionally, rising water temperatures, sea level rise, and extreme weather events caused by climate change could also affect seagrass. Under those circumstances, it's estimated that by 2100, the Pacific region could have lost between 5 and 35% of its seagrass ecosystems. And as a result, the protection and restoration of seagrasses is progressively becoming a focus of marine conservation efforts. So the seagrass restoration case study we focused on specifically is a pilot project implemented by the Fiji National University and the Fiji Locally Managed Marine Area Network in two villages, Silana and Natalera, which are located in the Dawasamu district at the eastern end of Viti Levu. So in the context of this project, seagrass meadows were surveyed in both Silana and Natalera, which showed that the meadows were relatively healthy in the village of Silana and degraded in Natalera. So as a result, replanting activities were conducted in Natalera, specifically in October 2023, followed by monitoring activities. Our objective here was really, and as Fed already mentioned, to understand community perspective on the contributions of seagrass restoration to conservation, food security, livelihood, and climate resilience. And as the restoration project in Natalera is in its early stage, community members mainly discussed what they thought the outcomes of seagrass restoration could be based on their past experience of having healthy seagrasses and their knowledge from other areas where seagrass is healthy, notably the neighboring village of Silana. So similarly to the mangrove oyster cultivation case study, we visited Natalera for a day where we conducted interviews and focus groups with men, women, and youth from both Natalera and Silana, following the same structure that Federico presented earlier. Just before moving on to the findings, I'm going to briefly present the community context on blue food activities, food security, and climate. So community members explained that the main methods used to fish were fishing lines, nets, and diving. They highlighted that due to decreasing fish stock in proximity to the shore, fishers had to go further out to fish. And they also identified a range of threatening processes affecting blue food in the area, which including overfishing, the use of more intense fishing practices, general environmental degradation, and unpredictable weather patterns. For food production, provision, the Silana and Natalera community rely on the cultivation of root crops, vegetables, and fruit cultivation, fishing, and the collection of shellfish and other invertebrates. Surplus producers sold at the market, and the income generated is used to buy products such as tin food, flour, rice, oil, etc. The climate impacts noted by the community were sea level rise, increasingly unpredictable weather patterns, and extreme weather events, including cyclones and floods. If we look at our three system outcomes now, community members explain that the main conservation outcomes provided by seagrass meadows are the provision of feeding ground and habitat for aquatic organisms, along with an improvement in water quality as seagrass can stabilize sand and reduce water turbidity. However, they also pointed out several factors that may hinder seagrass restoration, notably the continuation of land-based activities. So they mentioned the use of pesticide on agricultural land and sediment runoff from a quarry operating upstream. They also mentioned some fishing practices, notably dragging net on the seabed, which could have a negative impact on seagrasses and uproot seedlings. Regarding food security and livelihood, community members noted that seagrass restoration could lead to an increased availability of fish, shellfish, and invertebrate for direct consumption and sale. So they anticipated that this could reduce their dependence on some purchase item and reinforce the bartering system. Considering that seagrass restoration may lead to fish population being present near the shore, it was also so that fishers may be able to fish closer to the shore, which could reduce fuel costs, time spent traveling and fishing. And finally, participants also mentioned that seagrass-related activities could be integrated into an existing ecotourism activity. So an ecology is available for tourists in the village of Natalera, and they thought that tourists could be offered to snorkel in the seagrass or to take part in planting activities during the restoration phase. One of the main impediments to food security and livelihood outcomes was the continuation of overfishing. So several community members mentioned that the high number of fishing licenses issued was contributing to overfishing. And as a result, they thought that overfishing may neutralize to a degree the positive outcomes of seagrass restoration for both conservation and food security. And it was suggested by some community member that a community management plan may help kind of balance those two outcomes. Finally, climate resilience was a topic that was a little bit less emphasized by community members, and the main climate benefit they associated with seagrass restoration was the reduction of shoreline erosion. When identifying their priorities with regard to seagrass restoration, livelihood came first, with notably a desire to integrate seagrass ecosystem into ecotourism activities. So that's the green line at the very top. Several conservation outcomes, which are represented in blue, were also prioritized, notably around improving water quality, reducing impacts of activities on seagrass, and conducting seagrass replanting activities. Climate outcome in the form of erosion control was a little lower down the priority list, but still featured as a priority. It is in dark blue in the middle, dark purple, sorry. It is noteworthy that the framing of seagrass as a carbon sink was not mentioned by community members, and this comes as a reminder that the focus on carbon farming, carbon capture, which can sometimes be front of mind, should not overshadow other conservation, food security, and livelihood outcomes that are prioritized by communities. And finally, another priority for community was to further their involvement in the restoration activities by integrated seagrass replanting into community programs. So as we adopted a system approach, we tried to represent insights from community members using a causal loop diagram, a method that Fed presented earlier. So in our system, the variable of interest is the total area of thriving seagrass ecosystem, which you can see highlighted in blue on the slide. And this variable includes both the seagrass itself, as well as all the aquatic species it shelters. And basically, we then looked at the different drivers which can influence this variable. I won't have time to discuss them in any detail here, so instead I'll present them in the form of clusters. And I'm going to start with rate of replanting. So our variable of interest can be influenced by the rate of replanting of seagrass. Presumably, the higher the rate of replanting, the higher the likelihood of an increase in the total area of thriving seagrasses. And of the left-hand side of the diagram, you can see highlighted in light blue a range of factors identified by community as potentially influencing the rate of replanting. And they all have to do with how collaboration and coordination occur between researchers and community members, and how replanting and monitoring activities are integrated into community programs. The connection between the rate of replanting and the total area of thriving seagrass ecosystem is mediated by the survival rate of replanted seagrass. And this survival rate can be impacted by water quality, which itself is impacted by the management and regulation of land-based activities, notably agriculture and extractive activities. So we tried to articulate those points in the land-based activities circle that you can see on top. And the survival rate was also thought to be influenced by the intensity of fishing activities, which is represented at the bottom of the diagram. Finally, climate impacts, notably rising seawater temperature, cyclones, and storm, were also thought to affect survival rates of seagrasses. The third factor that was found to impact the total area of thriving seagrass ecosystem is the presence or absence of a diversity of marine species, which is itself influenced by the intensity of fishing activity, which can in part be influenced by food demand in the village, the number of fishing licenses issued, and the intensity of the activities and fishing equipment used. Now let's look at the potential impacts of an increase in the total area of thriving seagrass ecosystem on our three system outcomes. So with regard to climate resilience, the presence of seagrass can potentially increase seabed stability, which could reduce erosion and in turn reduce water turbidity. If we go to conservation, the presence of seagrass can increase habitat area for marine species and the quantity and diversity of marine species present. And finally, when we look at food security and livelihood, seagrass restoration, as already mentioned, could enable fishers to fish closer to the shore. It could also increase the quantity and diversity of aquatic organisms available, which could contribute to direct food consumption, sale, or barter. And in turn, this could reduce reliance on purchased food items and an increase in household or community income. However, this is largely dependent on establishing a balance between conservation and blue food outcomes, which you can see in the loop that's in the diagram, loop number 2, which kind of creates a relationship between the quantity and diversity of marine species and the quantity of edible marine species withdrawn. And I think that's the end of the seagrass restoration case study, and I'm going to hand over to Fed for a few takeaway messages.
Thanks, Elise. And as well as doing that, I'll quickly provide a reflection on the questions I've been answering in the chat. So very briefly before we move to the panel then, takeaway messages from the case studies, but also the high-level literature and thinking we've been doing on this study. There's 4 major takeaways we want to share with you. First is a methodological one, and this is for researchers, but also for some practitioners, because a lot of us do data collection, be it through our mail, on how we engage partners. So I think this has implications for more than just research. We were arguing that systems methodologies can be used in very participatory settings, and this can help connect the multiple outcomes in a system and helps us look beyond just the specific project and sector we're working in. The methods we're using and that exist in this space can help in designing and analyzing programs, focus on specific subsectors and practices, and it helps us understand the multiple implications of our interventions. In a way, it could be very helpful for theory of change building, which many of us do for our projects. Now, Blue Foods as an NBS contribution. The Blue Foods perspective and framework really helps us segment and build from the existing work that is being done at different scales in specific either NBS projects or fisheries and agriculture projects. And it really helps us put it into that high-level systems framing and look into the details of the different aspects of the system that we're working in. This can be done by linking the different outcomes and going beyond traditional economic and marine species management and help us integrate conservation and climate outcomes into our practices and research. Taking a community-based lens to NBS. So I mentioned earlier that food systems and to an extent NBS runs the risk of being a top-down project investment and intervention designed by donors, often not in the country where they're being implemented, and focusing on providing a very specific outcome. For example, carbon sequestration to access carbon markets or building a particular type of climate resilience. We argue that taking a broader lens allows us to navigate the multiple outcomes that can be achieved. And in the Pacific, many traditional practices are already an NBS. So NBS investments can actually support some of these practices in a way that maximizes co-benefits. And at a more country and potentially regional level, but particularly Fiji, which is where these case studies were, there are many ministries that are interested in managing the declining fish stocks and potentially augmenting aquaculture. And this is an acknowledgement of the pressures that population and climate change are putting on ecosystems. So this type of research and thinking can really help us think of how these growing investments in aquaculture and potentially conservation practices can also contribute to multiple NBS outcomes. And the NBS approach helps us manage some of those outcome identification and trade-offs. Now, I wanted to quickly reflect to some notes, and please look at the chat because I've been answering some of the great questions that have been coming through. Very briefly, the community already had traditional fishing. It's a river system, so there was more limited fish species there, but oysters have always been present there. What has happened is there's been an increased connection to hatchery and juveniles and access to equipment that allows them to grow in the mangrove environment. So there's been a bit of a formalizing of the industry that SPC and the ministry has supported. And this was identified by the community. So the process was the community envisioned this to be a potential livelihood augmenter in Fiji, and they approached the ministry, which with SPC was able to develop this program of work in the community. And in terms of the governance structure, we don't have anything presented, and there's actually not much written about it, but there was some fairly established roles and responsibilities associated with harvesting, with replanting, with setting up cages, and with the marketing and distribution, and fairly men-women-based distribution of jobs that allowed the industry to grow for the Monaida community. So Georgia, I'm going to hand over to you and get us moving to our panel speakers' reflections.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Fed, and thanks for all the excellent questions coming through. Thanks to both you and Laura-Lise. That was so fascinating, and I think it's really helped sometimes this kind of research to step back and look at an entire system and how that impacts the success of a project. So I think that's been so helpful. Okay, now over to our fabulous panel. Can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. Each panelist is going to spend just a couple of minutes introducing themselves and explaining why Blue Food Systems thinking is important and relevant to their institution. So over to you, Dr. Shalini Singh.
Good afternoon or good morning. Thank you. My name is Shalini Singh, as mentioned, and I'm actually an assistant professor in our College of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, Fiji National University. And a bit of my work looked at seagrass restoration, which Dr. Fed and Laurie had mentioned earlier. So for the Institute, Fiji National University, we are closely aligned with the environmental and sustainability goals that are present. And our job is to first look at our people. Our responsibility lies with our people, the Pacific nations as well. So for us, in terms of Blue Food System, we closely align it to things like food security and nutrition. So the ocean covers a lot of our Pacific islands. So in terms of our land mass, ocean resources are much more larger compared to our land masses. So that's where majority of the Pacific Island people will be dependent on their food resources, fish, shellfish, or seaweed. So the nutrition that comes from our ocean is our biggest resources for the people. The second is that our university deeply and actively works with trying to educate and help the communities in terms of climate resilience. So as the global climate change issues are affecting globally, so it is affecting a little more extreme for our Pacific Island nations. And majority of our island nations are affected heavily with intense cyclones, storms, or flooding natural events, and it affects the amount of food produced from our land or livestock that the people normally often get affected with. What happens is that so it also affects our economic opportunities. what happens is that the foods that we produce often gets affected due to the supply. Obviously, there is a lot of demand, and a lot of times when we are affected by natural disasters, it impacts the supply of our foods to the local as well as sometimes the international communities. So for many of our coastal communities that depend on the ocean resources, they end up harvesting a lot of these resources, fish, seaweed, etc. And often they are not processed and just sold out just to get a quick income for themselves. But often there's much more wealth that is hidden within the marine resources, such as sea cucumbers, seaweeds that are harvested, crayfish, etc. That often, if the value is added into it, there is some sort of processing done, could earn a little more money for our coastal communities. So it becomes a source of income for many of them. For the university, our role is also to help provide informed decision for our policymakers by either doing research to help build capacity of our local communities, to spread awareness on issues that are not well known by the communities. So for us as the university, National University, it becomes imperative that we help the communities to understand what are other ways we can help support and improve our food security, plus help with a diet that is much more improved and healthier for the Pacific Island communities, so that we can reduce the NDCs, the non-communicable diseases that are in rise. And for many other institutes, just like globally, the Fiji National University also is closely working and aligning itself to the Sustainable Development Goal, where a majority of the practices that the university is carrying out has to be having zero carbon emissions, and also aligning to reduce waste of many of the foods that are produced. So just like that, we are also trying to integrate Blue Food System into our national policies, and we do this by collaborating and providing our information or knowledge and sharing it with the relevant authorities when they're making policies around these areas. And also we help to advise the government or the nation on what sort of foods should be imported in, helping them to understand the healthier choices and the importance of locally sourced food. And for the Fiji National University, we try and collaborate a lot with NGOs, private and public sectors, whereby we can help to provide this information to our local communities, as well as through our education, providing maybe training information materials to the local communities in the native languages, providing education to our youths by giving them scholarships to take up further research, to do their masters or their PhDs, which are research that should be impactful to improving the livelihood of local communities. And that's an example where we collaborated with UTS, WWF, and other organizations in carrying out this work. So for us, the Fiji National University, the Blue Food System, it helps us to promote sustainable resource management for our inshore and offshore resources. It also helps us to reduce, like I said, our carbon emissions. So we support and promote sustainable aquaculture and fisheries education and training from the university, so that we can inform public to make right choices in terms of food that, excuse me, that might be producing much more carbon and releasing it into the environment. For us, the Blue Food System encourages and provides a way to reduce wastage as well of our marine resources or places that have been degraded. So we support by replanting and restoring some of these coastal systems, which are important, for example, mangroves and seagrasses. And in terms of our sustainable development goals, the Blue Food System helps us to identify the essential nutrients, some of the foods that are produced in Blue Food Systems, and how it can improve food security for Fiji and the neighboring communities and countries. So our main goal from the university is to educate and provide that research that promotes more awareness in terms of delivering and advocating for living labs. So our research are mostly held in areas that are needed by the communities, that can act as a living lab for our students and our communities. And we help to develop some of these innovative ways or nature-based solutions that can help communities to fight or actually adapt or mitigate themselves through the climate change crisis or even food security. So for the Fiji National University, it helps us to integrate the Blue Food System into our sustainable development framework that the university has, aligning it to the national as well as the international frameworks that are present, in order that we can promote sustainable goals as well as sustainable use of our resources that are or might be facing some challenges due to climate change and other human-based activities. So I'll stop here and allow the next speaker probably to speak.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting, great insights from FNU. And Terry and Una, if you can take less than 5 minutes, that would be fabulous. So we have a bit of time for our panel. Handing over to Terry from SPC for a science and practitioner kind of perspective on Blue Food Systems. You're just on mute there still. No worries. Still on mute there. Veronica, can you help us? We might skip over to Una while you figure out where the unmute button is, Terry, and then we'll come back to you. We'll message you. Sorry. Go ahead, Una. Una from WWF in Fiji.
Bulavinanka again. I hope everyone can hear me, and my apologies for the slight echo. I'm in a very empty room. It's the only one that I could find within the office that was empty. So just for a quick brief background, WWF has been working in Fiji for the past 30 years. The seascape that we have mostly been working is called Great Sea Reef. I'd like to call your attention to the map that's on the slide. So you can see that the reef system extends from level at the point called Undu and traverses the two main islands. So this reef system is contained by 32 fishing grounds or ingolingolis and crosses 4 provinces, and they're called Maduata, Mbua, Ra, and Ma. So WWF currently works in a few districts in 2 provinces of Ba and so in terms of Blue Food Systems, it's very important and relevant to WWF Fiji because it is very important and relevant to the communities that depend on this reef system. So one of the main things is, of course, sustaining livelihoods and food security. So in Fiji, as in most Pacific Island countries, fisheries are a major source of food and income for our communities that live alongside the coast. But not only that, it's also closely linked with our identities. But this is also hugely influenced by urban dwellers Some research a few years ago had found that about 70% of fish lands at the main fish markets here in the capital in Suva, namely, and I think some of our Fiji-based colleagues will know these places, the Bailey Bridge, the Suva market. It was from the fishing grounds in the Great Sea Reef, and mostly from the Ngoligolis in the north. So you can see the intensity of these resources that are not only being utilized by the communities that live alongside these systems, but also by urban dwellers. So blue food systems thinking helps out design strategies that sustainable use with conservation, and ensure communities can depend on fish and ocean products for generations. So one of the things that we do this through is interventions like fisheries management plans that have practical guidance and research that's collected and that guides community members decisions for things like management areas or protected areas due to high biodiversity or unique features, and also for fishing practices like restricting night diving and other things. An example of this is the Kolingoli Water Management Committee. Is a committee that has been put together by the community members themselves. Fishing grounds are customarily owned, and most of it is multiple districts. So the design of the management plans really need to be designed in a way that ensures that you understand the customary ownership, the tenureship, and understand how fish pressure versus other things like conservation and unique features, high biodiversity areas are interlinked into those. In the fact that we don't have a lot of time, I'll just touch on another point. So Blue Food Systems also puts the knowledge, needs, and rights of these community members at the center. So we've been working on the nature-based solutions enterprise with 5 districts in Rwanda. And this is looking at a community enterprise that's focused on products that that they do not use on a daily basis, so that will not affect their daily meals. And this is looking at sea cucumbers. So Sasamali, Madawat, and Rikendi own a fishing ground called, or customarily own a fishing ground called Golingoli Watawata, and as well as Nantongo district in Madawata province, working with organization to better manage their resources, and Singandam being the name of the community-owned enterprise is a key part of the plan. So one of the unique characteristics of the business is that it is owned by the communities as the customary owners of their fishing grounds and foreshore areas, and the community enterprise was created for the benefit of all the fishing ground owners to support them in, therefore implementing their FMPs, meet their livelihood needs, and cover their community and church obligations, which have been at the onset been made very clear in terms of some of the obligations that they are very aware of and need on a day-to-day basis. So the business is still in the early stages of its development, with already tons of learning, but only to say that it is essential to ensure that equity that is looking to be based on aquaculture, mariculture should benefit communities, needs to be designed around governance and decision-making processes. So I'll just stop there. There's a few other points, but I think we're quickly running out of time, and we'll have other answers for the panel discussions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Una. I think, yeah, you're sort of almost naturally speaking in blue food systems when you're talking about these projects, but perhaps there'll be some opportunities to implement this research approach with WWF in Fiji as well. Okay, Terry's found successfully off mute. Over to you, Terry. Thank you.
Maori from the Pacific community. My name is Terry. I'm the aquaculture technical officer for SPC. I would like to share the importance of blue food systems, particularly in the context of the Pacific Islands. As many of you know, that the Pacific Islands are surrounded by vast oceans that are rich in biodiversity and resources. These waters don't just define our geography. They are the lifeblood of our communities. Our connection to the ocean goes beyond mere sustenance. It is woven into the very fabric of our identities, tradition, and ways of life. So for us as Pacific Islanders, cultural preservation is important. The ocean is not just a source of livelihood, it holds cultural significance for many Pacific Islanders. It connects people, land, and the environment. So sustainable practices that respect traditional knowledge and indigenous practices are essential for preserving our heritage. In terms of food security, with escalating climate change and increasing population pressures, traditional land-based agriculture had faced significant challenges. So we believe that the ocean provides a resilient option for food security, with fish and seafood being primary protein sources for our people in our region. Environmental sustainability through biodiversity and ecosystem health. The Pacific Islands boast some of the most diverse marine ecosystems in the world, promoting a blue food system, aid in preserving biodiversity, protecting coral reefs, and maintaining healthy fish stocks, which are vital for resilience against these climate changes. Economic development. Our fisheries and aquaculture are key economic drivers for Pacific Island nations. So by adopting sustainable practices, we can enhance livelihoods and create new opportunities through ecotourism, aquaculture, recreational fishing, especially in coastal communities, while ensuring these industries thrive long in the future. I'm going to talk about our goal as the Pacific community and our role serving our member countries. So the major goal of the Pacific community in relation to blue food systems through the fisheries, aquaculture, marine ecosystems. This division aims to manage Pacific fisheries sustainably for economic growth, food security, and environmental protection. So I will only discuss a few of our goals that's relating to this. First is the research, data collections and development. SPC conducts extensive research on fisheries, aquaculture, and biodiversity by providing essential data that help our government member countries and communities for them to make informed decisions about managing their resources. Secondly, capacity building. SPC offers training programs aimed at enhancing the skills and knowledge of our local fisher folk and aquaculture farmers. So SPC helps in facilitating workshops and sharing best practices where they empower communities to implement sustainable practices effectively. Management tools and advices through policy development and climate resilience. SPC collaborates with Pacific Island governments to create and implement policies that promote sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. Their expertise helps nations develop frameworks that align with international standards while respecting local customs and practices. Recognizing the threats posed by climate change, SPC is dedicated to developing strategies that enhance the resilience of coastal communities and ecosystems. This includes the promotion of climate-smart aquaculture that can withstand changing environmental conditions. I forgot to mention in my slide, this important work of SPC also involves collaborative networking. So what we do, SPC fosters regional and international partnerships to share knowledge and resources by bringing together stakeholders from governments, from other NGOs around the world, and with our local communities. And together we create a collective approach to challenges facing the blue food system. In conclusion, embracing a sustainable blue food system is vital for the future of the Pacific Islands, encompassing food security, economic resilience, and cultural preservation. The Pacific community stands as a pillar of support in this endeavor, working tirelessly to empower communities and safeguard our oceans. Together, we can ensure a thriving blue food system that honors our heritage, supports our communities, and protects our precious marine resources for generations to come. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry. That was fabulous. And you can see how rich the team was working on this research from an academic and also a policy perspective that I forgot to mention before. Now, we're running short of time, so we're going to make some slight adjustments to the panel questions. And also, I think, fortunately, both all of the panelists addressed some of these questions through their initial presentation. So we heard from FNU around their support for the way that they support education and knowledge building around blue foods as part of their mandate. And I think we also heard from Una from WWF around the systems approach they're taking to blue foods through their work on nature positive enterprises. I know there's more to add to there, but we'd actually like to skip to the third question on this slide, which is taking a sort of broader look at aquaculture in Fiji. We've got sort of two really interesting case studies that have been shared in specific communities around this whole systems approach to developing an NBS that's focused on a blue food. But we've also heard from FED, and we know from this research that Fiji has a seriously ambitious aquaculture policy vision. There's a lot of sort of small scale case studies and there's a lot of good case studies sort of in operation. But what we really want to ask the panel is how can the productivity focus of this policy be balanced with the need to develop business and market development skills for communities? I think we've really learned, particularly from the mangrove oyster case study, that side of blue food systems is pretty critical if we're wanting to sustain and scale these kind of approaches. So I might hand to Dr. Shalini to take first stab at this question, and we'll also probably run a bit past the hour on this panel, if that's okay with everyone.
Right, thank you. So my take on how to improve this aquaculture for business perspective. So aquaculture has been in Fiji since 1950, so a little over 70 years now. And the biggest problem that the aquaculture industry faced was that we really didn't have a policy, which now that we do, after a lot of consultation with the stakeholders, as well as some of the commercial and private farmers as well in the aquaculture industry. The biggest problem is that, and I think some of the challenges that Dr. Federico highlighted in the mangrove oyster is that the products are available, and what happens is that the skills, the knowledge that the communities lack is how to develop that product into something that can earn them a much better income. So for an institute, it becomes challenging to ensure that the community, especially in order to increase their livelihood, they need to have the specific market development skills, which are often lacking in many of these small communities that are operated by women's or youth group. So the skills development is required, and that's where collaboration with stakeholders like other universities, other institutes, other countries, for example, Japan or China, that are well versed in how to develop the product into a higher level commodity that could help them or the communities to actually reach those high-end markets which currently are not being touched. So for us in the Pacific, it becomes essential that we provide that skills so that the communities can actually elevate themselves from the poverty areas right up to making it at a commercialized institute so that they can make a lot more money than they used to. So my take on this would be that for stakeholders to help transfer some of these technologies or skills or instruments that the local communities would require to develop their product that becomes more marketable and accessible to other markets, either domestically, regionally, or internationally. That would help to develop these. It's not that many of the communities probably would be lacking in terms of knowledge or skills. They are not aware of how to develop the products. And that's where collaboration and other activities would help to enrich and help these communities to market their products. The markets actually are there. Many of the products that are aquacultured could be supplied to international countries, but due to the standards and the requirements of international standard for importing some of these products needs to be met, whereby our communities do not have knowledge and skills in these areas. So for aquaculture to progress to the commercial level in Pacific or in Fiji itself, we need to provide those space for transfer of knowledge, upgrading the skills of communities. I think that would help to reach some of these goals much more faster. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I'd like to throw to Una for a bit of an implementation perspective. From your perspective, Una, how else can maybe if you don't want to speak necessarily to the policy, but what are some effective ways to develop business and market development skills for communities from your experience?
Thanks, Georgia. I think one of the main things to understand, firstly, specifically for Fiji's case, in terms of aquaculture and agriculture, is the tenureship and ownership of fishing grounds, because land tenureship is different from how the fishing grounds are customary. So that is already in itself a very complex sort of piece of research that whoever wants to get into this space needs to understand. The intense sort of consultations that needs to be had with different levels of community groups, be it the different villages that might have ownership over a particular fishing ground. One of the biggest gaps in this space is markets. We really need to have partners, stakeholders that have the experience to be able to link us with markets that would be able to continue the cycle to carry. intensive sort of access on one end and not sustainable in the future. That is something that it really has a potential to alleviate some of the issues around the livelihoods for communities. Having to spend so much time going out to the ocean to get this much fish to be able to give this amount of money to the church to continue the children going to school. All of these things that need to be taken into account to the design of any business at the very start, in order for some of these businesses to be able to be not only successful but sustainable in the long term and useful for the communities that are very badly needing some of this support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Una. Fed or Terry or Laura-Lise, would you like to add any final comments on this question?
I will just briefly reflect on the importance of understanding and having measures around the market demand, because it's very easy to want to grow an industry and assume the market is there. And we have I think everyone in school probably understands there is a growing market for different types of agricultural products, but I think formalizing that, doing market studies and having some economics behind it would help them make decisions and the skills that are needed and the training that's required. So I guess it's about coupling economic and market demand studies for the growing industry with the potential training that's required.
Any other thoughts from you, Terry?
Sorry, I just want to emphasize that our role SPC is revolved around the capacity building and providing trainings. So for aquaculture practices, anything relating to blue food systems. So we help all our country members in providing this training. So if we don't have the capacity within our organization, we help them, send them, we look for other institutions or other more advanced countries with the capacity, and we ask them to come and help and conduct trainings for them.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable contribution and to this question. Okay, I think that leads quite nicely onto the fourth question on this slide. I think we've really reflected today on how complex and kind of multifaceted a successful Blue Foods NBS will be, from technical through community engagement through market development, and it kind of spans obviously the mandate of a number of different ministries in Fiji, including fisheries, environment, climate change, and Aitoke affairs. So what I'd like the panel to sort of brainstorm a little is around existing mechanisms, like effective existing mechanisms that can support work across these different ministries. Una, can I throw to you first on this one?
Sure, thanks, Georgia. So in terms of in Fiji's case, we have multiple interministerial committees and working groups that focus on multiple things. I think the most to support blue food outcomes would be the Fiji's National Oceans Policy Steering Committee. It includes multiple ministries, inclusive of Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, fisheries. We also have the NGOs. You also have the crop agencies within that committee, and it talks about and coordinates ocean governance, including food security aspects. There are also joint policies and frameworks that also have its own strategies and shared responsibilities. So policies like the National Adaptation Plan. There's also the Integrated Coastal Management Framework that require multiple countries to multiple ministries to align on ocean and climate priorities. In terms of traditional governance and customary structures, we have the Itoke institutions, or the indigenous institutions in Fiji, that often work with government ministries. These are the provincial councils. These are the Mosivanua, which is a forum of chiefs within a particular province and district. These are also development agencies, like development bodies, like the district councils, that have multiple sort of players, including government focal points, and community representatives that are able to that are present in one sort of forum that would be best to utilize already existing structures that recognize traditional knowledge and that has the proper decision-making channels about both marine resource use and land use in terms of aquaculture for both cultural and food outcomes. I think those are some of the few, but there are also, like, integrated funding mechanisms. There are national and regional platforms like the FFA, SPREM, and multiple others that could support, of course, this topic that we're speaking on, which is blue food outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Una. Would anyone like to add some final comments to Una's response there? Come off mute. Okay, fabulous. Okay, given we are 10 minutes over time, I'd like to thank our panel very much. I think each of your insights has been awesome, and really kind of added a lot of value to this discussion. And thanks to all participants for your excellent questions in the chat. I see there's a lot of interest in this work, and I think what we've learned from the session today, we're going to incorporate into the final research products that are being developed. So please expect a follow-up email for everyone who registered with the recording of the webinar and the final research products over the next few months. And I just like to point out here, we've got any questions about the research, please send through to the UTS team or myself. And once again, a huge thanks to everyone who joined today, to the research team for their excellent presentations, and to our panel for all of their additional insights that brought a lot more, kind of meaning, I think, to this work. So I hope you've all really enjoyed the session today. I certainly have. I think blue food systems thinking is something that's very important to WWF, and will kind of continue to be brought into the way that we operate at a programmatic level. So thanks again, and I'll close the webinar now. So thank you.
Naka, thank you.
Naka, thank you all.
Okay, bye.
Okay.